Mr. Wayne, Clark Kent, Daily Planet.
What's your position on the Bat Vigilante in Gotham?
One man decides who lives. How is that justice?
There's a new kind of mean in him. He is angry. And he's hunting.
Mark, man, you know what to do to people with dishonor?
Don't listen to that nonsense. Only people scared of him. People who got reason to be.
Believe me, I'll do it!
Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. Good people living in fear. Don't believe everything you hear, son. I've seen it, Mr. Wayne. He thinks he's above the law.
A shocked, enraged, and fearful Batman represents America's response to the terror of September 11th. As the buildings around him dilapidated into rubble, Bruce Wayne was first shrouded by the fog of war. He finally faced a power much greater than himself. Drastically unprepared and underpowered, Bruce began to let Batman's founding principles slip in an effort for survival. Batman, known for being paranoid, now lived in a state of panic due to the elusive and ubiquitous threat the Superman's ability to be anywhere creates. Valentin, referencing the film Courage Under Fire, and Prussian strategic theorist Karl von Clausewitz explains that the significance of showing the Iraqi soldiers as shadows shows that trauma comes from interacting with the enemy, which creates this moment of confusion, the fog of war, and which leaves the American soldiers with a
feeling of powerlessness.
Not unlike a state of shock. As Zod's attack progresses in Metropolis, Bruce is on the ground with first responders and citizens rescuing people in need. The experience of shared trauma endows Bruce with the perspective and desires of the public, which he brings to the Batman. Batman begins to act in a defensive manner, as any citizen would do. The Superman made Batman feel just as powerless as the common man is powerless to either of them. In the spiritual malaise and destitute aftermath of 9/11, America lacked the most valuable asset of all, intelligence. America's leadership and defense forces did not know how to respond. And initially, Batman was clueless as to how to fight a being as powerful as Superman. And like a hungry animal, starved of intelligence, Batman had less patience and became more brutal. After a soldier lingers too long in the fog of war, fighting a battle he doesn't know he can win, brutalization, a gradual transformation of the soldier's system of values so that they adapt to the fragility of their life and that of their adversaries, forces them to adopt the behavior of deadly violence, which becomes the norm, as Valentin explains. This is how a soldier adjusts to killing his enemies in battle. When only one man walks away with his life, you have to be that man, no matter what. Alfred tried to warn Bruce that
That's how it starts. The fever, the rage, the feeling of powerlessness. That turns good men cruel.
fear of a second attack developed a cruel and unforgiving "we find them and we kill them" mentality within the CIA and in Batman, regardless of the cost. Now that this war between two titans has been declared, Batman began hunting down a series of individuals that would lead him to the power that he needed to put a stop to the madness. Following the 9/11 attacks, the CIA's demand for more precise intelligence was growing. An intricate terrorist network, Al-Qaeda, operated unseen in many Middle Eastern nations. Susskind's The 1% Doctrine tells us that the CIA would expand swiftly into an agency of covert and often deadly action. The game was kill or be killed. finding individuals or small groups tucked into diverse cultures, some sympathetic to jihadists, some not, some incredulous. It was man-on-man war. This quote perfectly describes the road cut out for Batman in BVS. Suspecting that they may have an answer to his problems, Batman ferociously hunts down members of Lex Luthor's private militia. In 2016, The Dark Knight returns to the big screen for the first time since 2012, where we witness Ben Affleck's massive and fearsome Batman hanging from the ceiling after interrogating one of the militiamen about the identity of the White Portuguese. Batman hunts down several other men in the 18 months since the Black Zero event, further leaning into his desire to beat Superman in the ultimate man-on-man war. Batman's brutalization exacerbates in his search for kryptonite. In the face of this seemingly insurmountable threat, the responders of their respective attacks began to change their ways and traditional methods to adapt to new necessities. President Bush gave a speech at the United States Military Academy in June of 2002. Without being too specific, Bush outlined how the United States and her defense forces were changing their ways to fight a new enemy.
For much of the last century, America's defense relied on the Cold War doctrines of deterrence and containment. In some cases, those strategies still apply, but new threats also require new thinking. Deterrence, the promise of massive retaliation against nations, means nothing against shadowy terrorist networks with no nation or citizens to defend. Containment is not possible when unbalanced dictators with weapons of mass destruction. We cannot put our faith in the word of tyrants. If we wait for threats to fully materialize, we will have waited too long.
In other words, when your enemy is elusive, ubiquitous, and capable of mass destruction, like how a terrorist network is to America, and like how Superman is to the entire world, the response of the threat is to adopt a new set of rules that allows them to fight back. It is completely unaffordable for a threatened force to adhere to the traditional set of rules laid out for itself because of the potential lives that an avoidable second attack would cost in the time wasted following legal procedures. This is at least the justification in this temporary temptation of tyranny. Bruce later fired back at Alfred in the aforementioned conversation, defending his war and justifying his violence towards international terrorists and ultimately Superman, telling Alfred to...
Jesus, Alfred, count the dead. Thousands of people. What's next? Millions?
Batman knew that if he waited too long, that if he waited for Superman to attack, it would be too late. This particular train of thought also ran throughout the Oval Office and the American intelligence community following 9/11. On August 26th of 2002, Vice President Cheney spoke to the Veterans of Foreign Wars group in Nashville, Tennessee, where he declared that
what we must not do in the face of a mortal threat is to give in to wishful thinking or willful blindness.
He exclaims that what America is now facing
constitutes as grave a threat as can be imagined.
After witnessing the wiping out of a few city blocks in Metropolis, Batman is facing a greater threat than he ever thought possible, and knows that he must not take any chances. That would be wishful thinking. Batman and the Vice President knew that the risks of inaction are greater than the risks of action. Both entities needed to amass more power for the fight they were facing. As we know, except for the Superman, power cannot be innocent. Therefore, Batman and the American government must impose on the freedoms and livelihoods of the people to gain what they need. September 11th is the first foreign attack on the American mainland, and Black Zero represents that same phenomenon as the first alien attack in the film's modern world. Black Zero plays the same role. It is the first attack from beyond, So it gives the responders of their respective worlds the defensive justification to reach beyond their power and ignore their restriction to prevent a second attack, even without the guarantee of one, and no matter who it hurts. Batman initially tried to shrug off Alfred's warning that he was becoming more cruel because of his powerlessness by reminding Alfred that the crimes Batman commits in his crusade are nothing new. In fact, Bruce claims that
New rules. We're criminals, Alfred. We've always been criminals. Nothing's changed.
even the Gotham residents can sense the Batman's sharpening tunnel vision as he cracks down harder on criminals in search of intel. Valentin described that the American response to 9/11 is a unilateralist policy, which often facilitates the exploitation of the most deprived social groups. The Gotham residents can sense a new kind of fear in criminals since the Black Zero event, as a result of Batman becoming more unilateralist and straying away from his own imposed restrictions. After watching Kahina Ziri cry for answers from the Superman on the news, Clark Kent decides to pay her a visit at her home in Gotham. Upon his arrival, he learns that
she's been gone.
This naturally raises concerns for Clark, but he takes the opportunity to inquire with the neighbors about the Batman. The husband ominously tells Clark that
the fact that she's smart and she got out of this city, and you need to get out of here before dark unless you want to run into her.
The wife objects, shouting,
"Don't listen to that nonsense. Only people scared of him, people who got reason to be."
This scene brilliantly represents the American strategic system's response in the years following 2001 and how it impacted the public. We have one citizen that warns that the imposing authority is coming for us all, and if you don't watch your back, you'll be next. He has grown paranoid because the imposing and violent authority has reduced the standards of evidence down to mere suspicion alone. The 1% Doctrine tells us that the statutory framework of democracies has stood firm on the rights of privacy. Essentially, that means that there is a prohibition against any of the government's eavesdropping on its own citizens. Much like Batman's aversion to killing his enemies, the CIA abandons its restrictions and commits a mortal sin in a time of crisis and war. After the CIA built the ultimate spyware with the help of First Data and Western Union, nearly 1 trillion communications collected annually are searched, allocated, and stored. This egregious imposition directly violated the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which guarantees you the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. This heinously unconstitutional act in the CIA's response to 9/11 is equated and mythologized with Batman's mortal sin in breaking his rule against killing his enemies. So although the husband is the fictional representation of the paranoid citizen, he is correct in assuming that freedoms and lives are being abridged by the fearfulness of those in power. Clark's encounter with the Gotham residents also perfectly enacts the opposition in America by having the wife disagree. She deems the husband's paranoia to be nonsense. She specifically states that
only people scared of him, people who got reason to be.
This clearly indicates that some citizens believe that the imposing authority, the government, is only using their power against the people that it needs to. In other words, using their power in a defensive manner. The split 50-50 of the husband and wife's views do not even precisely represent America, considering that the historic public affirmation of Bush's handling thus far of the war on terror would surely translate into equally historic gains in the 2002 midterm elections. Combining Susskind's writing with the public approval of America's response, with how Valentin informs us that the very rare cinematic allusions to the 11 September attacks are found sparingly throughout film, it is sensible to apply the real world's initial approval of the response to the War on Terror to BVS's public approval of Batman's war against Superman. Batman, in his representation of the response, shares a mission with President Bush. One is trying to save the world from Superman, and the other is trying to save the world from terrorism. The perpetuated fear of the omnipresent looming threat positioned the response to it with an approval rating that hovered at an astonishing 90%. Unfortunately, in either situation, it did not matter what the public thought. If the Fourth Amendment needed to be violated to find a terrorist, it must be done. If Batman had to take a life to ensure the acquisition of kryptonite and the death of Superman, it must be done. As the opposing authorities' mindset grew more unilateral and absolute, so did their actions. The threat they faced did not allow for any delay caused by legal practices or hesitations when pulling the trigger. Batman is no stranger to discipline. It's discipline that makes you strong, and it's discipline that keeps you alive. So how much discipline is required not to overstep your power when you have so many opportunities at your disposal? Batman, like all Americans, have recourse to a formidable technological superiority to stay alive. Especially none other than Dick Cheney. After arming Predator drones, spiking the defense budget, and arranging an invasion of Iraq, the vice president prepared to do whatever was necessary to accomplish his goals. The second attack after 9/11 was intolerable and inexcusable. The vice president and others vital to the administration, like Donald Rumsfeld, found themselves unashamed and unfettered in the use of power. Now that America finally stood alone as the world's only superpower, this type of aggressive self-reassurance of believed invulnerability allows them to execute coordinated attacks in the Middle East with little consideration for the legitimacy or justification of their incredible displays of power. On a cold, late November night in 2001, Vice President Cheney, Director of the CIA George Tenet, and others gathered in the Situation Room at the White House to discuss forming a battle plan in the War on Terror. Cheney made it clear to everyone present, if there's a 1% chance that Pakistani scientists are helping Al-Qaeda build or develop a nuclear weapon, we have to treat it as a certainty in terms of our response. He continues, it's not about our analysis or finding a preponderance of evidence. It's about our response. With an absolutist declaration such as this, it is clear that the administration is thinking about all they possibly can do, with no regards to what they should do. Cheney's doctrine lies at the very center of Batman's mindset towards Superman. After exclaiming to Alfred that there are millions of lives and the entire world at stake, so long as Superman has yet to bleed, so long as he lives, Bruce reveals his true response.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
This administration-wide mentality gave way to the bypassing of the Fourth Amendment and the obscuration of what is considered evidence, and gave Batman justification for abandoning his rule. After Bruce makes his declaration, Alfred tries to talk some sense into him by stating that Superman is not our enemy. Bruce later learns the hard way that Alfred was right. Alfred knew, as Valentin explains, that real threat does not come from the outside. It is constructed by the highest levels of power who are tempted by tyranny. The Americans and Gothamites alike felt the effect of this when they no longer have freedom of privacy or are too scared to go out at night. Alfred knew that Batman, and by extension America, was headed down a dark path. Their newfound sense of absolutism endangers the state of an ethically controlled military and the implementation of strategic violence. These two concepts must be abided by so that America's ethical and ideological foundations are not put in danger. Unfortunately, America and Batman's founding principles are endangered when threatened by an insurmountable enemy, forcing them to take actions that they would not normally take. Those burdened with the task of responding to an elusive, ubiquitous, and destructive threat know that they cannot take any chances with potentially millions of lives on the line. Facing a severe lack of intel, George Tenet's CIA operated on a strict and unrelenting mindset of find them, stop them. They had a minuscule understanding of how Al-Qaeda operated, but knew they were executing an elaborative international network. First Data and Western Union stepping up to the plate played a pivotal role in helping the CIA and US government track phone calls, emails, and most importantly, financial records. The new surveillance machine could track the financial movements of known terrorists worldwide and follow the money back to the top of the organization. Able to track and freeze accounts, the plan was to starve the terrorist organization. Whether that meant making them unable to buy food or depleting their organization of growth and resources, it did not matter. The vice president repeatedly made it clear that no matter the cost, the CIA must act on even the slightest suspicion. The actionable aspect of Cheney's 1% doctrine propelled the CIA to test their limits. Cheney made it clear that it was not about analysis, it was about our reaction. This is especially the case when it comes to prisoners of this ill-defined war on terror. The CIA, under immense pressure from the vice president's absolutism, knew that the speed in which they had to operate to prevent a second attack would be drastically delayed by the droves of judiciary processes that they would normally have to comply with. Everyone in the CIA agreed that it was necessary to hold prisoners as long as possible, under the guise that they are too valuable as sources of intelligence, and maybe even too dangerous to release. The capturing of prisoners and disregard for due process began shortly after 9/11, but by 2003 it became common procedure. In a meeting with the Saudi Arabian Prince Nayef bin Sultan and CIA agent Rolf Mowat Larsen, there was a request that the prince arrest some highly sought after suspected terrorists. The prince agreed as a favor, but demanded that if you have any evidence against them, you better show it. So if you're keeping count, the CIA has now broken the 4th, 1st, and 5th Amendment. The collaboration between the CIA, First Data, and Western Union that ignored the FISA court led to the biggest search and seizure operation in U.S. history. With the help of the Patriot Act, the CIA bypassed the 4th Amendment to spy on phone calls, emails, and financial records of the American people. Considering that they are committing unreasonable searches and seizures on a mass scale, then people would also have to watch what they say without being suspected of terrorism, or at least heavily monitored. Therefore, if you cannot speak freely without being called a terrorist or whatever, then the First Amendment has been abridged as well. The Fifth Amendment clearly states that no matter what, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Holding prisoners without evidence is a direct violation of this. By defying the majority of the 5 most sacred values of America, the CIA, government, and everyone else involved has committed the mortal sin of tyranny. In a time of great fear, the responders broke their most sacred values by becoming judge, jury, and executioner. Squirming in the trammel of the Superman, the fate of the Batman renders the same result as the real-life responders. Batman's sacred values are not listed on some immutable constitution, but they are ubiquitous throughout the comics and his mythos. The terror of watching his parents gunned down before him as a child created the mortal sins for the Batman of killing his enemies and creating orphans. However, Susskind states that there was no precedent to what had been done to America and what the country now faced. The same can be said for Batman following the Black Zero event. Facing an unbeatable power, Batman has to expand his limits to do what may be necessary in a crisis such as the potential end of the world. Without kryptonite, Batman was useless against Superman. At all costs, it had to be acquired. Batman then adopts a mindset similar to Cheney's CIA protocols. Loss of the kryptonite is unaffordable. Batman had to find it to stop him. The interrogation of captured enemies and the use of formidable spyware gave Batman the intelligence he needed to know when the boat, named the White Portuguese, would be delivering the kryptonite to Gotham Harbor. An intense car chase explodes in the streets of Gotham as the international mercenaries transport the mineral and are hunted down by the fearsome Batmobile. During the chase, Batman causes the death of a few mercenaries, but it did not matter. The kryptonite had to be intercepted, no matter the cost. Batman is trying to win this man-on-man war, so in the grand plan of killing Superman, taking the life of a mercenary is worthless while millions of lives are at stake. The destructive potential of the enemy is too great to worry about your own violence. The perceived threat of the Superman caused Batman to act erratically and become judge, jury, and executioner himself. The original mercenary that Batman interrogated knew nothing. He was too low level. Yet, he was still branded with the hot iron bat and sent off to prison. The branding sentenced him to a transfer to a metropolis prison, where Lex Luthor would pay to have him killed. Batman's brand of justice was becoming too imposing, that while straying from the code that binds him, he began to trample on the rights of citizens and commit his mortal sins. Albeit unknowingly, Batman branding the mercenary sentenced him to death in prison before any sign of a trial. Clark Kent sees the damage this does to the people of Gotham when he speaks to Mrs. Santos outside of the GCPD. She makes it clear that the murdered prisoner was not her husband, but was the father of her child. In the great effort to combat Superman's ability to kill and create orphans on a cataclysmic scale, Batman has now also killed and created orphans. His ignorance and terror in the face of an elusive, ubiquitous, and destructive threat caused Batman to inflict the general horror of tyranny, or at least his version of it. The seemingly insurmountable threat caused the responders to commit the same crimes and unconstitutional acts, abridging the freedom of those they were trying to protect, with the CIA being given the green light by Cheney to do whatever is necessary, and Lex informing us that Batman is the only person who stands a chance against Superman. Then they both, the CIA and Batman, possess the monopoly of legitimate violence, meaning they are the only ones capable of inflicting necessary violence. While possessing the means to execute such violence, Valentin tells us that in such a situation, those who possess the monopoly are capable of anticipating all violence other than its own. In Batman's mission to save the world, he calculated every aspect of a fight with Superman, yet never realized the damage he'd done to his legacy or the people of Gotham. However, any line he may cross is justified by the potential threat of Superman bringing about the end of the world. Bruce, enraged, exclaims to Alfred in the referential scene of the 1% Doctrine that
he has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And we have to destroy him.
With a grave as threat as this, it only further drives Batman away from his founding principles because of the necessity of eliminating the threat. The more Batman lets his mind go through constant justification of his first murder, the further he falls into the soldier's brutalization, coming to terms with the fragility of his life and that of his enemy. All this furthers the loosening grip on his soul. After a long, gruesome 20-year career as the Batman, which is told to us subtly and eloquently through backstory, he now stands face to face with the most powerful man in the world. In the titular fight, we see through visuals, key details, and brilliant filmmaking that Batman has prepared the abandoned warehouse as a trap for Superman. Valentin's chapter on September 11th tells us that the experience of fear, as well as a feeling of vulnerability, transforms the urban landscape into a trap. This fight signifies the first time that either character experiences true vulnerability. Batman's 20-year career has never presented him with an enemy capable of defeating him until now, especially not one nearly as powerful. Superman first experiences true fear and vulnerability after inhaling a cloud of kryptonite gas. Batman even explains to him that that's what he's feeling.
That's fear.
And therefore, vulnerability. The urban landscape continues to develop as a trap as sonic waves and machine guns fire at Superman. As the titular fight commences, Batman has completely let go of his morals at this point. He's here to kill. Valentin explains to us that ethically controlled and strategic violence must be implemented so that ethical and ideological foundations are not put in danger. Now that Batman has completely suspended the grip on the reins of his morals, he endangers his ideological foundations. Valentin further explains that the soldier is supposed to fight for his ideal by respecting ethical and spiritual values. If he abandons them because of war, like the brute, he runs the risk of losing his soul and also his life. As Batman raises the kryptonite spear over his head, ready to pierce Superman's heart, he hears the pleas of his victim to save his mother's life. Suddenly, flashbacks of his ideological foundations begin to swarm his mind. He realizes that he has made a grave mistake. Most of all, Batman realizes that he is not our enemy. Hearing Superman beg for the life of another while Batman placed his boot firmly on his neck gave Batman the revelation that the beaten enemy was only a political illusion used to construct an artificial threat. Batman is horrified upon this realization and throws the spear in a fit of rage. All of his preparation, all the crimes he committed, it had all been done in vain. Superman was not the enemy here, and in fact, they are more alike than they are different. Batman had led this crusade against Superman unjustly. Susskind tells us that for a president, the most serious charge that history might level at him is taking the country to war under false pretenses, such as claiming Iraq has weapons of mass destruction when they do not. As a representation of those responsible for responding to 9/11, Batman performs their actions by leading a false war against Superman and committing the mortal sins of his ideological foundation.